What is the most WTF thing you've experienced seen during a flight? Years ago. Flying from Dallas. Woman in the seat behind me has a screaming kid with her. I put on noise cancelling headphones and turn up the volume. All is improved until I smell something truly gagging. For unknown reasons I pull the headphones off just in time to hear her ask the brat. Make a little mud? Double quote. I know Texas has some quaint phrases, but that one was the understatement of the decade. The kid had filled its diaper in the plane with some really toxic shit odor. I'd like to tell you she took the child to the bathroom and cleaned up. But, like the screaming, she didn't mind and the rest of us didn't matter. Uncle is a mountain climber. He summited Everest a few years ago, and a couple months ago was climbing St. Elbrus in Russia. He summits St. Elbrus successfully and goes to the Moscow airport to fly back to Canada. After everyone had boarded the plane, a Chechnya man runs to the front and tells everyone that he has a bomb attached to him that he will blow up unless the Russian government lets Chechnya prisoners go. My uncle is at the back of the plane confused as to what is going on because he only speaks English. After 5 hours many people had fainted because the plane was not on and therefore air conditioning was not on. This was during a heat wave also. So the terrorist allows doctors to come aboard to help the sick people. However, instead of doctors it was the Russian equivalent of a SWAT team that kicked the living shit out of the man. After this everyone was deplaned and my uncle was stuck in the airport for an additional 16 hours being questioned by the Russian officials, without being allowed to call the Canadian embassy. And the airport didn't call the embassy either. He eventually came home with this sick story. TLDR. My uncle was on a Russian plane when a Chechenian terrorist held the plane hostage for 5 hours. On a flight from Toronto to Thunder Bay, Ontario back in 2009. We were halfway there and flying near Sault Ste. Marie. And it was nighttime. I'm looking out my window and I see aircraft lights way off in the distance, getting bigger. I ask the guy next to me to look out the window and tell me if I'm crazy. But nope. He sees them too. We're flying at 30,000 feet. And we both watch as slowly the lights get bigger and bigger. It's a jet. And it's coming right for us. Neither of us truly believe it's gonna hit. I mean, the ATC can't be that stupid, right? After a few seconds, I'm not so sure. And I grit my teeth. The plane gets close enough to ours that I can see into its cabin windows. And it flies directly beneath us. Less than 500 feet for sure. The turbulence of it flying below us shakes our plane. Neither the captain nor flight attendants never mention a thing. Freaked me right the hell out. I ended up sitting next to some cougar in first class where she proceeded to take advantage of the free drink and get completely smashed and hit on me heavily. She even got up during takeoff to use the restroom. She was basically climbing up the aisle since the plane was still ascending. 2 minutes later, she comes back with significantly more cleavage. It was so awkward. I tried my hardest to just listen to music and look out the window. She eventually moved on and got into this loud political debate with the people in the back row. Then this obese, flamboyant gay man in front of me angrily gets up out of his seat, turns around, gets into the aisle. He proclaims loudly in the most lispy voice I've ever heard. Hello, lady. This is not a public debate. Would you please shut up as some of us are trying to sleep. Double quote. She then silently sat back down. It was awesome. A flight from Minneapolis to LA. I had quite a terrifying experience. I was sitting next to an elderly man who, partway through the flight, needed to use the restrooms. I moved aside and watched as he walked to the front of the plane attempting to find the restrooms. As he reached the front of the plane, I noticed he wasn't exactly headed towards the restrooms. Rather he was headed toward the front exit door. Horrified as I was, he began to attempt to open the front exit at 34,000 feet. He began to pull down on the lever to release the door when a flight attendant ran over to him and stopped him. She kindly redirected him towards the restrooms. A red eye from SLC. A young mother sits in the aisle seat with her infant in the row I'm in. She's chunky and hippie-ish and pleasant enough. The seat between us was then filled by another mother. This one easily in her 80s. Who was traveling with a dozen of her grandchildren GRT grandchildren, Mormons. Of course everyone within sight of an infant immediately feels anxiety at the prospect of an overnighter with a child who is sure to wail non-stop. So we take off. And the young mother proceeds to envelope her baby. Holding the child close in against her ample bosom and curling over her him and cooing and talking softly. This goes on for at least 4 hours. And the baby barely makes a peep. Maybe once it starts to get upset and the mother redoubles her efforts and the baby settles down again. At the end of the flight, the mother receives accolades for her baby handling skills from nearly every passenger around her. TL. Doctor, I took a 4-hour red-eye with an infant in my row. And said infant never cried or otherwise disturbed another passenger for the flight's duration. I had just got out of prison and was on my way home. I had just found out that my wife, who waited for me the whole time I was in prison, had just died in car accident right before I was due to be released. So I'm on the plane and this creepy old guy in a pale suit keeps talking to me like he knows me. He keeps trying to offer me a job but he won't tell me anything about what he actually does. Or even his real name. But he knew my name. And he knew things about me that he couldn't have known. Anyway. Our plane was grounded by a storm and I ditched the guy because he was creeping me out. Got off and decided to rent a car and drive the rest of the way home. I know he didn't get off the plane because he was sleeping when I left. And I watched. Nobody else got off the plane after me. On my way home, I randomly stop in some town to get something to eat at a bar. And who is there waiting for me? That same creepy old man. You can't explain that. I was on a flight from the East Coast to Arizona. In the middle of the flight the pilot gets on the intercom and is like, is anyone a doctor on the plane? There was a lady like 3 rows up from me on the right section who had an oxygen tank and her family is all around her. I didn't think anything of it since it just seemed like she was just sick. 20 minutes later, the pilot gets on the intercom and is like, we are diverting and making a stop in Denver. We land in Denver probably going 600 miles an hour. I have never gotten to the gate that fast in my life. After the door opened there was police, firefighters, EMT, you name it. You couldn't really see what was going on since there was so much commotion. I remember the family got off the plane with the lady. I specifically remember the look on passenger on my right when she looked out the window and saw there was a white sheet over the woman that was 3 rows up. She died on the plane. So you wonder if someone dies on a plane what happens. They land the plane, get the body off the plane and do some paperwork and you are on your way in 30 minutes. The kicker to the story is in Denver it was during spring break so they had a lot of overbooked passengers. The pilot gets on the intercom and says they are letting people from Denver board the plane since we had a few empty seats, mind you we were coming from the East Coast. Sure enough, a lady sat down in the same seat that the woman just died in. They didn't even clean IT. I could not believe IT. I was in awe for the rest of the flight. I was thinking about telling the woman after the flight that someone died in her seat 20 minutes before, but I figured if that was me, I wouldn't want to know. Long time lurker and I finally have something to post. So here goes. I was on a flight back to Pittsburgh from LA. In coach of course. I board the plane. Sit down and I notice 2 nurses helping an elderly woman into the seat directly in front of me. She was in a wheelchair and looked to have suffered a pretty bad stroke. About 30 minutes outside of Pittsburgh the woman shit herself. And the smell was god awful. Then the nurses get up and actually changed her fucking diaper right in front of me. The smell instantly doubled when it hit the air and it was at that point I actually prayed to God to knock that fucking plane out of sky and end it. Which he didn't, as I imagine he was laughing his ass off. A flight from London to Berlin, me and my wife were the only passengers on board. It was kind of awesome. The flight attendants were in a wicked mood and loaded us up with drinks and the pilot addressed us by name on all announcements. Halfway through the flight the plane's engines went dead silent and the flight attendant got a worried look on her face and said, "I fucking hate it when they do this." I wasn't really sure what was going on, but we figured the plane was gliding or something. I've never heard a plane be that quiet before. Anyways, we got insanely drunk and partied with one of the attendants later that night at Berghain Panorama Bar. Good times. Few years ago me and a few friends were flying from London to NY. When we were about to land it was completely dark outside. And at this point we were pretty sleep deprived and kind of nervous. Never having been to the US before. Anyway. The in-plane lights are turned off and the plane lands. As the plane comes to a halt on the runway, we notice a weird orange flickering glow illuminating the inside of the plane through the right-hand windows. Everyone looks out. And there's a wrecked airplane in the center of a huge fucking fire right next to us on the runway. The aircrew flat out ignored it and acted as if nothing was wrong. And we never found out what the hell happened. In the state of mind we were in, it was a very surreal experience. Best comment of the day. Long time ago picked up a girl in a club, was about to take her home. Random older woman came up to me, pulled me aside and just told me not this one. Listened for some reason. An hour later the girl I wanted to pick up started a fight over something completely ridiculous, broke some guy's window, and a bottle over someone's head. Ended up picked up by the police. Best cock block ever. Thanks random older lady.